Today I want to compare PC Ultra settings to Xbox Cloud Gaming for Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'd also like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video, more about them at the end. Now, as I've said previously, Xbox Cloud Gaming for Microsoft Flight Simulator specifically is very impressive. It allows you to use the sim on platforms that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. That can be a phone, Xbox One, or indeed an underpowered PC or even a laptop. And seriously, it's not just the technology of cloud gaming that I find impressive, but also the visuals on offer here. That said, by this point you will have already noticed some very distinct differences between the two different versions of the sim. Now, for the Xbox Cloud version, I captured this directly through the web browser using Chrome. And in case you're wondering, the hardware used at the other end of the connection here is custom Xbox Series X hardware. The footage for that you can see right now is on the left. On the right is PC on Ultra settings. This is running at a resolution of 1440p. The PC hardware being used here is a Ryzen 7 5800X with an RTX 3080. Of course, internet speed is very important for both the cloud gaming as well as the PC gaming. The cloud gaming obviously because it needs to stream in the content, and the PC gaming side of things because it needs to stream in textures, photogrammetry and many of the other visuals on offer here. So connection wise, I'm running a 1 gigabit connection, that's 1000 megabits down and 50 on the up. Now during the testing there are a number of differences. One of the most obvious ones I want to talk about right up front, and that is the rate at which the photogrammetry loads in at. So on Xbox Cloud Gaming here you can see the buildings down below, and when you compare the two side by side there is a very obvious difference. To ensure that the test was fair, my rolling cache, the entire cache in fact on the PC version of Microsoft Flight Simulator, was completely cleared. So that meant both the PC version as well as the cloud version were starting from the exact same point. Now interestingly, there is a difference here between the complex geometry and the more simple buildings that we can see right here. Here obviously you can see that the resolutions of the texture on the PC versions are quite a bit higher, but in terms of the photogrammetry streaming, there's very little difference. This seems to be mostly a problem with the more complex regions. So we jump back here to Westminster Palace in London. Again, you can see on the left the cloud gaming, and the buildings look, well, they kind of look like they're melting, for want of a better term. And this is because the photogrammetry is taking its time to actually stream in. And this will purely be down to the way Microsoft have got things set up on the server side of things. Remember, whilst Microsoft Flight Simulator uses a client-server setup, both the client and the server are on the opposite end of the connection when it comes to Xbox Cloud Gaming. Meanwhile, for the PC version, the client is obviously on the PC side, local to me, and the streaming data, the server, on the other end of the internet connection. Now, perhaps an interesting comparison here will be to compare Xbox Cloud Gaming with the Xbox Series X build of the game. That's something I will try in another video because I think it will provide some interesting insights at the very least. Now though, you can see on the PC with decent hardware as well as a very good internet connection, there is quite a stark difference between the way photogrammetry actually streams in to the two different versions of the sim. So really, this is one area that I feel the cloud gaming version of the sim could do with some improvements. But you know, that said, the photogrammetry streaming issues really seem to be the only real problems, the only real minor flaw with the cloud gaming version of the sim. In all other respects, the comparison is very favourable. In fact, in my opinion at least, it's extremely impressive, especially when it comes to all manner of terrain. So here in the Alps, we've got obviously a lot of mountains, but ultimately I think we've got a very reasonable comparison here. Obviously, the PC texture and details are a fair bit sharper, and perhaps arguably the draw distance is a little better as well. But just how noticeable that this is will depend on the type of terrain that you're looking at. For example, here we're a few miles from the Hoover Dam, right on the border between Arizona and Nevada. So a very different type of terrain in terms of coloration at least to what we see in the Alps, and to my eyes at least, the difference in texture quality is perhaps not quite as stark. At least not in regards to the terrain that's closer to the camera. The story is perhaps somewhat different when it comes to mid-distance and far distance. Elsewhere in the sim, many of you may be wondering about how details stand out. Well, here we are at Los Angeles International Airport. On the left we've got the Xbox Cloud version, and again on the right we've got the PC version. So not only can you see that the textures are somewhat sharper here, of course, but there's also far more detail, especially noticeable on the runway and the taxiways. Now, one other subject I do want to touch on very briefly here is the occasional stutter that you're seeing. Now, you'll notice that this occurs on both the PC version of the Flight Sim as well as the cloud version, although the stuttering never really occurs at the same points, and this has been a problem with Microsoft Flight Simulator right since day one. But to be perfectly fair, this problem has improved over time, although that said, the problem is still there and it does seem to affect all platforms. Now here, as we get up above LA somewhat, you can really start seeing the difference between draw distance. Ultimately, it's very good on the Xbox. It doesn't hold up quite to the PC Ultra version, but it's also better than what you'll see on PC low settings. Unfortunately, I don't have a comparison to share on that right here, but something for a future video for sure. At any rate, as the cloud version comes in there, you can see that the buildings don't quite make it out past the middle distance. Now, visuals aside, I would have liked to have done some tests on performance, but frame rate on streaming platforms like cloud gaming can be very, very hard to calculate accurately, so that's something perhaps for another time. Okay then, so after sitting down and doing a direct comparison in exact same areas between the two different versions of the sim, what's my takeaway opinion on the cloud gaming version? Well, I remain extremely impressed, in fact perhaps more impressed after the comparison than I was before. The cloud gaming version handles very, very well, in fact it holds up very, very well. The fact that you can now get this to run on last gen consoles with the Xbox One, or indeed in a web browser on a underpowered laptop or just a basic PC, or of course if you so desire a phone, is a very, very good technical achievement, so kudos to Microsoft right there. Now, talking of technical achievements, Squarespace make the management of your online presence easy. From blogging platforms with threaded conversations, likes and replies, to third-party extensions that allow for the management of inventory, product promotions and bookkeeping, Squarespace is a complete solution for all online needs that even includes the ability to create gated and members-only content. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/obsidianant to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.